The sun rises hard over the Nile, and the river does not look like a place of mercy. It gleams like polished metal beneath the cliffs, calm on the surface, ancient in its silence, carrying barges, grain, soldiers, priests, tribute, and rumours from one end of Egypt to the other, somewhere beyond the cultivated black earth, beyond the green line of fields and the mud-brick villages waking to heat and flies. The desert waits like a wall. In that world, during the height of Egypt's 18th dynasty, a king sits at the centre of a machine so vast that even the gods seem to move through it, by schedule offerings at dawn, tax shipments by river, stone hauled from quarries, gold brought north from Nubia, foreign envoys bowing beneath painted ceilings, and scribes turning acts of power into words that are meant to survive longer than the men who performed them. The name of that king is Amenhotep II. He's not the most famous pharaoh in modern memory. He does not stand in the popular imagination like Tutankhamun, glittering and young beneath a golden mask, or Akhenaten, strange and radiant beneath the disk of the Aten, or Rameses II, carved into cliffs and repeated across Egypt like a royal echo. Amenhotep II occupies a darker space. He comes after Thutmose III, the great empire builder, the general king whose campaigns push Egypt's influence deep into Syria-Palestine and make the Nile kingdom one of the dominant powers of the late Bronze Age. To inherit that empire is to inherit wealth, but also pressure. It is to inherit restless provinces, rival princes, distant cities that obey when watched and rebel when they can, and borderlands where loyalty is not a feeling but a calculation. Amenhotep II's answer, at least in the royal record that survives, is not softness. It is not quiet diplomacy, though diplomacy certainly exists in his world. It is not merely administration, though administration is everywhere beneath the surface. His answer is image, speed, spectacle, punishment, and awe. He presents himself as a warrior beyond ordinary human limits, an archer whose arrows pierce targets no one else can master, an athlete whose strength belongs more to legend than flesh, a chariot fighter, a hunter, a rower, a king who does not simply command violence from behind palace walls, but appears to embody it. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because Amenhotep II's story is not just about one ruler's cruelty. It is about how an empire teaches people to fear the king even when he is far away. The phrase Egypt's bloodiest pharaoh has a powerful pull, but it must be handled carefully. Scholars do not possess a complete death ledger of ancient Egypt. No one can line up every reign, count every execution, weigh every campaign, and declare one king the bloodiest with mathematical certainty. The evidence remains incomplete, and much of what survives was created by the state itself, by scribes whose work was not neutral reporting but royal memory shaped in stone. Yet the reason Amenhotep II attracts such a severe title is not difficult to understand. His inscriptions use violence not as an unfortunate detail, but as a language of kingship. They describe defeated enemies, rebellious chiefs, bodies displayed as warnings, foreign lands crushed into obedience, and a ruler whose ferocity is made to look divine, necessary, almost cosmic. In this sense, the terror of Amenhotep II's reign is not only what may have happened on campaign, it is also what Egypt chose to say had happened, and how it wanted the world to understand the consequences of resistance. This is one of the strange difficulties of reading ancient power. A pharaoh's inscription can be both evidence and performance. It can preserve a real event while enlarging it into theatre. It can remember violence while arranging that violence into a message. It can tell us what a king wanted believed, which is not always the same as telling us everything that occurred. But what a king once believed is itself historically important. Amenhotep II's monuments do not present a ruler anxious to appear gentle. They present a ruler whose body is a weapon, whose temper is storm-like, whose enemies exist to demonstrate the reach of Egypt's arm. In the bright ceremonial language of the new kingdom, fear becomes order, punishment becomes justice, conquest becomes the restoration of balance. The king's brutality is not framed as brutality. It is framed as the world being put back into its proper shape. To understand that world, the Nile must be seen not as a peaceful backdrop but as the spine of an imperial organism. In the north, the delta opens toward the Mediterranean and the routes to Western Asia. In the south, the river narrows toward Nubia, where gold, soldiers, cattle, stone, and labour move through fortified corridors of Egyptian control. On the west bank of Thebes, temples of millions of years rise among desert cliffs, built not only for the dead king's afterlife but for his ongoing presence in ritual economy. Workers cook, eat, discard bones, repair rooms, tend fires, carry jars, mark accounts, and leave behind small traces that are far less dramatic than war inscriptions, but just as revealing. A royal mortuary temple is not only a monument to eternity, it is also a workplace, a storehouse, a kitchen, an administrative node, a living apparatus for feeding the memory of a dead or divine king. That contrast matters. Amenhotep II's reign cannot be reduced to blood. Egypt in his time is a civilization of extraordinary skill and texture, painted limestone, polished stone vessels, glass of vivid colour, carved figures kneeling before gods, horses trained for chariots, scribes moving through columns of numbers, priests washing divine statues in secret chambers, and craftsmen shaping objects meant to pass into the tomb. The same world that writes of impaled enemies also makes delicate fragments of luxury glass. The same king who is described as a terrifying warrior is shown kneeling before Amun, offering vessels, presenting himself not as a wild destroyer, but as the disciplined servant of divine order. This is where the mystery deepens. Amenhotep II is not a simple villain standing outside Egyptian civilization. He is a product of that civilization at one of its most powerful moments, when beauty, wealth, theology, bureaucracy, and violence are woven tightly together. In the temples and stelae, the king's body becomes more than human. He is strong like a bull, fierce like a predator, beloved of Amun, chosen by the gods, master of horses, breaker of foreign lands. Such phrases can sound formulaic at first, the usual thunder of royal propaganda. But with Amenhotep II, the emphasis on physical prowess becomes unusually intense. He seems determined to show that he is not merely the son of Thutmose III, but a living weapon worthy of the empire he inherits. This is the anxiety hidden beneath the confidence of kings. A new ruler must prove that distant vassals should still tremble. He must prove that the death or aging of one pharaoh has not weakened Egypt. He must prove, especially after a giant like Thutmose III, that the empire has not passed from a conqueror to a lesser man. So the opening image of Amenhotep II's reign is not simply a battlefield, it is a performance staged across geography. In Syria-Palestine, local rulers watch the balance of power between Egypt and the great kingdoms of Western Asia. In Nubia, Egyptian authority depends on governors, garrisons, temples, and the constant reminder that the pharaoh's reach extends far beyond Thebes. In Memphis and Karnak, elite audiences see the king through monuments, ceremonies, and tales of impossible athletic power. In the royal tomb, deep in the Valley of the Kings, another version of the ruler is prepared for eternity, wrapped, hidden, surrounded by objects and spells, waiting in darkness while later generations disturb, reuse, and rediscover the dead. Amenhotep II's story begins, then, with a paradox. He rules an empire at its height, but height is not the same as safety. He inherits victory, but inherited victory must be defended. He wraps violence in sacred language, but the very need for terror suggests that obedience is never automatic. And though his monuments try to make him seem unstoppable, the historian is left with broken evidence, partial texts, damaged objects, later discoveries, and voices mostly filtered through the palace. What survives in the record suggests a king who understood that fear could travel where armies could not remain forever. It could move along roads, through garrisons, into the courts of foreign princes, down the Nile to Nubia, and into stone inscriptions where the message would outlive the bodies it described. By the time the sun lowers over the western cliffs, Egypt's fields turn gold, the river darkens, and the temples begin to lose their edges in shadow. Somewhere in that fading light stands the outline of Amenhotep II athlete, hunter, son, conqueror, worshipper, corpse, memory. Around him gathers the machinery of empire, and within that machinery, terror is not chaos. It is policy made visible. It is kingship sharpened into spectacle. It is the warning that the pharaoh's power is not only to rule the living, but to decide how fear itself will be remembered. Before Amenhotep II becomes the king whose inscriptions speak in the language of terror, he is a prince growing inside the shadow of one of Egypt's most formidable rulers. Thutmose III does not leave behind a small throne. He leaves behind an empire stretched by repeated campaigns, an army hardened by movement, a court trained to think in terms of tribute and obedience, and a memory of kingship tied closely to war. For Amenhotep, this inheritance is not simply political, it is personal. He is born into a dynasty that has learned how to turn conquest into administration, how to turn foreign defeat into temple wealth, and how to turn a living pharaoh into the visible edge of divine power. The boy who will become Amenhotep II grows toward kingship in a world where royal masculinity is not imagined as quiet dignity alone. It is imagined as strength, endurance, command, and the ability to make distant lands believe that Egypt's arm has not weakened. The court around him is a place of polished surfaces and hard expectations. There are palace chambers, training grounds, stables, river docks, scribal rooms, temple courtyards, and the constant presence of men who understand power as a practical discipline. Officials manage estates. Priests protect divine routines. Military men remember roads north through Canaan and Syria, river routes south through Nubia, desert stations, wells, forts, and cities whose loyalty depends on pressure. A royal heir must learn more than ceremony. He must learn how an empire breathes. He must understand that a shipment of gold from Nubia is connected to a temple offering in Thebes, that a hostage prince raised at the Egyptian court may one day become a useful ruler abroad, that a chariot team is not only a weapon but a symbol, and that a king's public body must appear more powerful than the bodies of other men. What survives in the record suggests that Amenhotep II's identity is shaped very deliberately around physical excellence. The athletic claims attached to him are striking even by royal standards. He is remembered as a master of the bow, a rider, a rower, a hunter, a man whose strength seems to exceed normal limits. Some of these claims belong to the familiar world of pharaonic praise, where kings are never merely capable, they are incomparable. Yet the intensity of the image matters. It shows what Amenhotep II once seen, or what the court once preserved, not only a legitimate son, not only an heir, but a body trained into royal proof. In a dynasty where military success has become central to imperial authority, the prince's strength is not private vanity, it is political theatre waiting to be used. The comparison with Thutmose III is unavoidable. Thutmose III's career is long, complex, and monumental. Later tradition remembers him as a great warrior king, and his campaigns into Western Asia create the conditions Amenhotep II inherits. But a son who follows such a father stands before a difficult mirror. If he appears too mild, the outer edges of empire may begin to test him. If he merely repeats his father's language, he risks looking like an echo. Amenhotep II's solution seems to be intensification. He does not simply present himself as a king who commands armies, he presents himself as the king whose personal force is itself terrifying. He is not only the man behind the army, he is imagined as the concentrated violence of Egypt in human form. There is still debate about the precise political mechanics of the transition from Thutmose III to Amenhotep II. Scholars still discuss whether there was a co-regency, how long it may have lasted if it occurred, and how certain campaign dates should be understood. The evidence remains incomplete, and ancient Egyptian regnal records do not always answer modern questions cleanly. But the uncertainty itself helps reveal the atmosphere of the time. Succession in a royal house is never merely a date on a timeline. It is a period of careful messaging. Temples must know whom to honour. Officials must know where loyalty lies. Foreign courts must know whether the old power remains intact under a new name. Whether Amenhotep II's authority was introduced gradually beside his father, or asserted fully after Thutmose III's death, his reign begins under the pressure of continuity. The empire must not see a seam. Training, then, becomes more than preparation. It becomes a language. The bow is especially important. In New Kingdom royal ideology, archery is not a casual sport. It condenses skill, control, power, and divine favour into a single image. A king who can draw a powerful bow and pierce a target from his chariot is a king whose body appears disciplined by the gods. Horses, too, carry meaning. Egypt's chariot age is a world of imported and adapted technologies, elite training, specialized equipment, and status. To master horses is to master speed. To ride and shoot is to embody the fast violence of the late Bronze Age battlefield. The prince who grows in this world learns that the royal body is watched, measured, praised, and transformed into a weapon before it ever enters an enemy land. There is a lesser-known texture beneath this image of hard training. The world that makes such a prince possible is deeply organized and deeply expensive. Horses must be fed and cared for. Chariots require wood, leather, metal fittings, craftsmen, and constant maintenance. Bows require materials and expertise. Stables require grooms. Training requires space, instructors, time, and a court culture that values elite display. Amenhotep II's celebrated strength is therefore not only individual, it is supported by an entire royal ecosystem. The king's body may be praised as superhuman, but behind the superhuman stands the labour of many human beings whose names usually disappear. That disappearance is one of the quiet truths of Egyptian kingship. The prince's achievements are preserved because they serve the crown. The trainers, handlers, craftsmen, stable workers, boatmen, scribes, and attendants who sustain the royal image are mostly absorbed into the background. Ancient power often works this way. It lifts one body into symbolic brightness and lets thousands of other bodies become infrastructure. Amenhotep II's later monuments will make his enemies small. But even before he has enemies carved beneath his feet, the system around him is already teaching the world to see him as larger than life. His upbringing is also religious. The future king does not train as a secular commander in the modern sense. He is formed inside a sacred order where Amun, Re, Horus, and other divine powers are not decorative ideas but part of the operating logic of rule. The pharaoh is expected to maintain Mut, the ordered balance of the world. That balance can be expressed through offerings, temple building, justice, ritual, and, when framed by royal ideology, the defeat of chaos beyond Egypt's borders. This is the key to understanding how violence can be made to appear holy. The prince who learns to shoot, ride, command, and endure is also learning that the king's violence, properly represented, is not supposed to look like personal rage. It is supposed to look like cosmic repair. Yet the human pressure beneath the theology should not be missed. Amenhotep II is not inheriting a quiet land sealed from danger. He is inheriting a network of obligations that extends far beyond the Nile Valley. Cities in Syria-Palestine remember their own rulers, their own gods, their own calculations. Nubia is not simply a source of gold, but a region with its own histories and communities living under Egyptian domination. The Egyptian court may speak of foreign lands as subdued, but obedience across distance must be maintained again and again. A prince raised for this world must learn that empire is not won once. It is performed repeatedly, enforced repeatedly, and narrated repeatedly. By the time Amenhotep II reaches the throne, the shape of his kingship has already been prepared. He has been trained to appear tireless. He has been placed in the lineage of conquerors. He has inherited the aura of Thutmose III but must avoid being swallowed by it. He has absorbed a theology in which the king stands between order and chaos, and a military culture in which speed, archery, horses, and personal ferocity become signs of legitimacy. The later terror of his inscriptions does not rise from nowhere. It grows from this earlier world of discipline and expectation, where the heir of Egypt learns that to rule an empire, he must first become an image no rival dares to doubt. The empire Amenhotep II inherits is not a simple map shaded in Egyptian colour. It is a living system of routes, officials, temples, garrisons, marriages, hostages, tribute, threats, and carefully repeated ceremonies of obedience. From a distance, the 18th dynasty can look like a golden age standing firmly on the earth, Thebes rich with offerings, Karnak expanding in stone, the Valley of the Kings receiving royal dead, Nubian gold flowing north, Asiatic goods entering palaces and temples, and Egypt's name carried far beyond the old borders of the Nile. But up close, the empire is less like a wall and more like a net. It holds because many knots remain tight at once. If one knot loosens, the strain moves elsewhere. If too many loosen, the appearance of control begins to tremble. This is the world at its peak, and peak is a dangerous word. It suggests height, brilliance, and command. But it also suggests exposure. Egypt under the great kings of the 18th dynasty has moved far beyond the older image of a kingdom protected by desert and cataracts. It now reaches into the political storms of the late Bronze Age, where great powers watch one another across lands crowded with smaller rulers. In the north, Egyptian authority extends through Canaan and into the Syrian sphere. where city-states and local dynasts balanced loyalty, fear, ambition, and survival. To the south, Nubia is bound into Egypt's economic and military life, its resources drawn into the machinery of temples, palaces, and royal display. Between these two frontiers lies the Nile Valley itself, the sacred centre that must be fed by everything beyond it. Amenhotep II does not inherit an empty throne, he inherits a system already filled with memory. Thutmose III's campaigns have created a powerful expectation that Egypt can strike far from home, return with tribute, and force foreign rulers to acknowledge pharaonic supremacy. The annals of conquest, the lists of places, the piles of offerings, the images of bound captives beneath royal feet, all create a political atmosphere in which victory is not an occasional achievement, but part of the king's job description. A lesser ruler might have tried to preserve the empire quietly, but quiet preservation is difficult when imperial ideology has been built on active domination. The new king must show that the empire has not merely survived his father, it must appear renewed through him. The wealth available to Amenhotep II is immense by ancient standards. Gold from Nubia is especially important, not only as treasure but as a language of power. Gold covers divine images, decorates royal equipment, moves through diplomatic exchange, and turns the invisible strength of the state into something that can be seen under torchlight. Stone, timber, metals, cattle, grain, textiles, aromatic substances, skilled labour, and luxury goods flow through official channels. Foreign products arrive as tribute, trade, or diplomatic gifts, though the categories can blur in the language of royal inscriptions. Egypt likes to describe the world as bringing its riches willingly to the pharaoh, but what survives in the record suggests a more complicated reality. Gifts may be diplomacy, tribute may be coercion, and submission may be a performance required by power. The temples are among the greatest beneficiaries of this imperial world. Amun of Thebes, in particular, stands at the centre of a religious and economic universe that has grown enormously during Egypt's expansion. Land, animals, servants, workshops, storage facilities, and offerings support the cult. The temple is not merely a sacred building, it is a major institution, a keeper of wealth, a recorder of ritual, and a partner in royal legitimacy. A king like Amenhotep II needs the gods, but he also needs the institutions that speak for them. He gives to the temples, and the temples help make his kingship appear eternal. In carved relief, he offers to Amun. In return, the god grants life, power, victories, and years. Beneath that polished exchange is a practical relationship between crown and priesthood, one that scholars still debate in its details because the evidence is uneven and often written from the perspective of those who benefited from the system. Beyond Thebes, Memphis also matters. It is a northern royal and administrative centre, closely tied to military culture, chariotry, and the management of Egypt's connection to Asia. A king who campaigns north cannot rule only from southern temples. He must be present in the north as well, near roads, arsenals, stables, shipyards, and the delta routes opening toward the Levant. Egypt's empire is not controlled by one city alone. It is coordinated through multiple centres, each with its own weight. The royal court moves through a landscape of power where geography itself becomes political Thebes for divine grandeur and dynastic memory, Memphis for strategy and northern reach, Nubian centres for extraction and frontier command, and the roads of Canaan for imperial pressure. In this world, administration is as important as battle. Even if battle makes louder inscriptions, scribes count, officials inspect, envoys travel, messengers carry orders across distances that can turn certainty into rumour. Fortresses and garrisons hold strategic points. Local rulers are watched, rewarded, threatened, or replaced. Some foreign elites are brought into Egyptian orbit, and in certain cases, young princes from abroad may be raised in Egypt so that loyalty can be cultivated before they return to rule under pharaonic influence. This is one of the more subtle instruments of empire, not only to conquer a place, but to reshape the expectations of its future rulers. The evidence does not let us reconstruct every life caught inside this system, but it reveals enough to show that Egypt's dominance depends on far more than a single battle line. The empire also depends on imagination. A farmer in the Nile Valley may never see the lands named in royal lists. A temple worker may never ride through Canaan. A craftsman making objects for a royal foundation may know foreign lands mainly as words, images, materials, or captives represented in art. Yet the empire must feel real to them. It becomes real through tribute carried in procession, through exotic animals, through foreign objects, through stories of campaigns, through lists carved into walls, through the king's body shown trampling enemies who stand for entire regions. In that sense, empire is not only territory, it is a story repeatedly told to the Egyptian people, to the gods, to foreign rulers, and to the king himself. But every story of perfect order hides strain. The farther Egypt reaches, the more it must rely on intermediaries. The more wealth it gathers, the more institutions compete for influence, the more it boasts of universal power, the more dangerous rebellion becomes to the image of the throne. Amenhotep. The second's harsh style begins to make sense inside this pressure. Terror is not the strategy of a weak kingdom, but it can be the strategy of an empire that knows distance is dangerous. If the pharaoh cannot stand permanently in every city, fear must stand there for him. If troops cannot remain everywhere forever, the memory of punishment must do some of the work. So the empire at its peak is magnificent, but not gentle. Its beauty is real stone temples glowing in desert light, painted stele, polished vessels, incense in sanctuaries, horses moving beneath bronze and leather, scribes bending over accounts, the river filling and falling with the seasons. Its violence is also real, even when filtered through royal exaggeration. Amenhotep II rises within a system that has learned how to make domination look sacred and how to make wealth look like proof of divine favour. The dark force of his reign will not come from madness or random cruelty alone. No single explanation fully accounts for this. It comes from an imperial world that rewards the king who can turn fear into policy, policy into inscription, and inscription into memory. Amenhotep II's empire is easier to see when it's imagined through rivers, roads, forts, temples, and tribute. But the king himself wants to be seen through the body. Not the ordinary body that grows tired, sweats under armour, misjudges distance, fears pain, and depends on other men. The royal body in his inscriptions is something harder and brighter. It is trained beyond weakness, guided by gods, dangerous at rest, explosive in motion. In the art and language of kingship, Amenhotep II becomes an archer who cannot be matched, a horseman fused with speed, a hunter who meets wild strength with greater strength, a rower whose endurance overwhelms others, and a warrior whose anger falls on foreign lands like a divine weather event. This is not a private personality portrait in the modern sense. It is the public construction of a pharaoh whose physical perfection is made to stand for imperial control. The famous athletic image of Amenhotep II matters because it turns kingship into proof. A crown can be inherited, but strength must appear visible. A throne can be passed from father to son, but an empire wants reassurance that the new ruler can still frighten distant places into obedience. So the king's body becomes evidence. He draws the bow, he drives the chariot, he handles horses, he rows against men who cannot equal him, he hunts powerful animals. These scenes and claims are not merely entertainment, even if some of them belong to the elite world of royal sport. They say that Amenhotep II is not soft palace flesh. He is disciplined force. He is the son of Thutmose III, but he is also his own weapon, sharpened before Egypt and before the gods. The bow is the clearest symbol. In New Kingdom Egypt, archery is not just a battlefield skill, it is a royal grammar of control. The archer judges distance, holds tension, releases at the exact moment, and strikes from afar. That makes the bow a perfect image for empire. Egypt itself must strike across distance, through deserts and foreign roads, against enemies who may never see the king's face. Amenhotep II's archery feats, especially the tradition of shooting through metal targets, are spectacular in this sense. Scholars still debate how literally some details should be read, and the evidence remains incomplete. But literal accuracy is only part of the point. The story tells viewers that the king can overcome material resistance. What ordinary men cannot pierce, he pierces. What stops others, he breaks. The target becomes more than a target. It becomes foreign resistance transformed into a demonstration. This is where royal propaganda becomes subtle, even while sounding loud. If the inscription simply said the king was powerful, it would be ordinary praise. Instead, the king's power is placed into action. The listener sees the drawn bow, the moving chariot, the impossible shot, the exhausted companions, the king still strong when others fail. In a largely non-modern media world, where official texts are carved, recited, copied, displayed, and embedded in sacred spaces, such images have long lives. They're not fleeting boasts. They're designed to be encountered repeatedly by elite audiences, priests, officials, visitors, and later generations. They are also designed for the gods, because Egyptian monuments do not speak only to human eyes. The king performs strength in a world where divine approval and human politics cannot be separated. The chariot deepens this image. By Amenhotep II's time, the chariot is one of the defining technologies of elite warfare in the Eastern Mediterranean and Near Eastern world. It requires horses, specialized training, skilled drivers, composite materials, repair networks, and a culture of aristocratic display. The king in a chariot is not simply a man with a weapon. He is a fast-moving platform of royal violence, a body carried by technology and animal power wrapped in the resources of empire. To show mastery over the chariot is to show mastery over speed, coordination, wealth, and discipline. It also places Amenhotep II inside the international language of late Bronze Age kingship, where horses and chariots are symbols of prestige as well as instruments of war. Yet there is something almost excessive in the way Amenhotep II's image insists on personal prowess. Earlier pharaohs are also mighty. Later pharaohs will also crush enemies in relief. But Amenhotep II's self-presentation seems unusually fascinated with the king as athlete-warrior, as though his individual body must answer a political challenge. This may be partly because he follows Thutmose III. A son after a legendary father must not look merely adequate. He must look astonishing. The inscriptions do not allow him to be a competent administrator with a good army. They turn him into a marvel of flesh, bone, training, and divine favour. No single explanation fully accounts for this emphasis, but the pressure of succession sits behind it like a shadow. There is also a harder edge. Athletic power easily becomes punitive power. The same king who pierces targets can pierce enemies. The same hand that controls horses can control foreign lands. The same endurance that outlasts other rowers can outlast rebellion. This blending of sport, warfare, and terror is not accidental. Royal hunting, for example, is never only a leisure activity in pharaonic ideology. To defeat a lion, a bull, or dangerous wild animals is to act out the defeat of chaos. Nature itself becomes a stage on which the king proves he can impose order. The foreign enemy is then placed in a similar symbolic position, dangerous, disorderly, destined to be subdued by the king whose violence is authorized by the gods. Modern readers may feel the brutality immediately, but ancient royal ideology tries to prevent that reaction by giving violence a sacred frame. The pharaoh does not present himself as cruel for cruelty's sake. He presents himself as the one who protects Egypt, pleases Amun, and maintains Mat by breaking those who threaten order. This does not make the suffering unreal. It explains the logic through which suffering is transformed into legitimacy. What survives in the record suggests that Amenhotep II's court understood the political usefulness of fear very well. They did not hide the king's capacity for violence. They polished it, arranged it, and made it shine. The difficulty is that almost every surviving image of this royal violence comes from the side of power. The defeated do not get equal space on the stone. The frightened city does not write the inscription. The prisoners do not explain their own world. Local rulers in Syria-Palestine, Nubian communities under Egyptian control, soldiers on both sides, labourers who maintain the machinery of war, all are mostly silent or heavily filtered through Egyptian categories. This silence matters. It means the historian must read Amenhotep II's image with double vision, as evidence for what the Egyptian state wanted to proclaim, and as a veil over the human complexity that proclamation erases. So the violent image of Amenhotep II is not a simple window into the man's inner life. It is a carefully built royal mask. Behind it there may have been real strength, real campaigns, real punishments, real fear, and perhaps a ruler genuinely proud of his physical gifts. But the mask is larger than the face. It belongs to a political system that needs the king to be more than human, because empire across distance is always fragile. The further Egypt reaches, the more useful it becomes to imagine the pharaoh as unstoppable. In that imagination, Amenhotep II stands in the chariot, bow drawn, muscles controlled, enemies reduced to symbols, gods watching, scribes ready. The man becomes a message, and the message is simple enough to travel farther than any arrow resistance will meet a king who has already turned himself into a weapon. The first great test of Amenhotep II's reign comes not in the stillness of temple ritual, but on the roads north, where Egypt's empire thins into distance, and every local ruler can feel the change of a new king. The death of an old pharaoh, or even the rumour of transition, is dangerous in an imperial world. Cities that have bowed for years may begin to calculate again. Chiefs who sent tribute may wonder whether the new ruler has the same reach as his father. Rival powers beyond Egypt's direct control may watch for hesitation. In the language of the Egyptian court, these movements become rebellion, disorder, insolence, the stirring of foreign lands against the rule that the gods have granted to Pharaoh. But beneath that official language lies a practical truth. Amenhotep II cannot simply inherit obedience. He must demonstrate it still belongs to him. So the king moves north into the zone where Egypt's power is both visible and contested. This is not a march into an unknown wilderness. Egyptian armies have passed through these corridors before. Officials know routes, supply points, river crossings, fortified places, and the habits of local politics. The lands of Syria-Palestine are not empty spaces waiting for pharaonic drama. They are dense with towns, fields, shrines, rulers, families, merchants, messengers, and alliances that shift under pressure. Egypt's inscriptions often compress these human landscapes into lists of conquered places and defeated enemies. But the reality is more complicated. A city may submit because it fears destruction. A ruler may offer goods because he wishes to survive. Another may hesitate, hoping Egypt is distracted. Some may be loyal only while Egyptian troops are near enough to matter. For Amenhotep II, this northern campaign becomes a stage on which he can answer the question hanging over his succession. Is he merely the heir of Thutmose III, or is he a ruler to be feared in his own right? His inscriptions answer with force. They present the king as swift, overwhelming, almost personally responsible for the crushing of resistance. The army matters, of course. No pharaoh campaigns alone, whatever the heroic language suggests. Soldiers, charioteers, officers, scouts, scribes, grooms, servants, and supply workers all move behind the royal image, but the text draws the eye back to Amenhotep himself. The king is the spear point. The king is the storm. The king is the body through which Egypt acts. One of the most disturbing traditions connected with his northern warfare centers on the campaign associated with Takhsi, a region in the Syrian sphere that becomes part of the drama of imperial punishment. The surviving accounts describe a striking and grim act of royal theatre. Captured leaders are executed, and their bodies are displayed as warnings, with one brought south toward Nubia as a message for another frontier. The details have been studied and debated, and scholars still discuss chronology, wording, and the relationship between different campaign records. But the political meaning is difficult to miss. This is not violence hidden in a corner of history. It is violence turned into communication. The defeated body becomes a royal inscription before it is even carved in stone. It tells distant subjects that rebellion does not end when the battle ends. It continues as memory, as fear, as a public lesson. The modern listener may instinctively search for the man behind such an act. Was Amenhotep II unusually cruel? Was he insecure after following a great conqueror? Was he acting within an accepted but harsh imperial tradition? The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for the tone of his reign. What can be said more securely is that the Egyptian state saw value in recording such severity. The court did not soften the image, it preserved it. That preservation tells us that terror was not merely a byproduct of war. It was useful. It could discipline Syria-Palestine and Nubia at the same time. It could make one campaign speak to more than one region. It could transform a local punishment into a message travelling across the empire's full length. The roads north must have carried rumours faster than official proclamations. News of a pharaoh's violence does not need polished grammar to spread. Traders hear it, envoys repeat it, local rulers weigh it in private, Egyptian officials use it. A city that has not yet rebelled understands what may happen if it does. This is how imperial fear works. It does not require constant destruction everywhere. It requires memorable destruction somewhere, made visible enough that other places imagine themselves in its shadow. Amenhotep II's reign seems to understand this principle with unusual clarity. His inscriptions create a king who can appear wherever obedience falters, and whose punishment can be made to echo beyond the place where it occurs. Yet it would be too simple to imagine the campaign only as a scene of royal rage. Campaigning is exhausting work. Armies need food, water, animals, equipment, and information. Chariots break, horses tire, men fall ill. Roads are shaped by terrain, climate, local resistance, and the availability of supplies. The king's triumphant inscriptions rarely linger over these practical difficulties, because difficulty weakens the shine of inevitability. But behind every boast of speed and victory is a logistical achievement. To move an Egyptian force northward and maintain pressure over foreign cities requires organization as much as courage. This is another hidden layer of Amenhotep II's power. His terror depends not only on personal ferocity but on a state capable of delivering him to the edge of rebellion and bringing the results home. There is a lesser-known tension in the way these campaigns are remembered. Egyptian texts often describe foreign rulers as treacherous or rebellious, but from the perspective of those local rulers, the situation may have looked very different. They lived between greater powers, local obligations, economic survival, and the immediate needs of their communities. Submission to Egypt may have brought security, but it also brought extraction and humiliation. Resistance may have been risky, but it could also be framed locally as necessary, because their voices are largely absent. The Egyptian version dominates. What survives in the record suggests not a neutral map of right and wrong, but an imperial narrative in which all defiance becomes chaos because Pharaoh's order is the only order the inscription recognizes. This northern campaign therefore does more than preserve military history. It reveals the emotional architecture of empire. Amenhotep II's court wants fear to feel rational. It wants obedience to seem inevitable. It wants distant rulers to imagine the pharaoh not as a remote figure in the Nile Valley, but as a present danger. The campaign becomes an argument written through movement, combat, punishment, and display. Thutmose III is gone or passing into memory, but Egypt's hand remains strong. The sun is not weaker. The frontiers are not free. The empire still has a king who can come north like heat from the desert and leave behind a story no city can ignore. As the army turns back toward Egypt, the visible battle may be over, but the more durable campaign continues. It moves into temples, stelae, court memory, and the minds of officials who will carry the lesson elsewhere. Amenhotep II has not simply fought enemies, he has begun to define the tone of his rule. The prince trained into a weapon has now been displayed as a king who uses fear with deliberate force. The empire at its peak has found its new voice, and that voice is not calm. It is sharpened, ceremonial, and cold enough to last in stone. Terror, in Amenhotep II's world, is not only an emotion, it is a tool of government. It travels where officials cannot stay forever, where garrisons are too small to watch every road, where foreign rulers smile in tribute scenes but calculate in private, and where the death of one pharaoh can make distant cities wonder whether obedience might be renegotiated. To rule an empire from the Nile is to face the problem of distance every day. The king may be divine in Egyptian ideology, but his body can stand in only one place at a time. His army can march, strike, and return, but it cannot sleep permanently inside every town of Syria-Palestine or every bend of the Nubian Nile. Fear fills part of that gap. It becomes a second army, one made of memory. Amenhotep II's reign reveals this with unusual sharpness. because his inscriptions do not treat punishment as a shameful excess to be hidden. They present it as a public act with political meaning. Captured leaders are not simply removed from the conflict. They are transformed into warnings. The bodies of defeated chiefs, in the royal narrative, become signs displayed for others to read. The point is not only that these men have died, the point is that their defeat has been made visible, portable and symbolic. One frontier can be taught through an event that happened on another. A campaign in the north can speak to the south. Syria can be used to frighten Nubia. Nubia can be reminded that the king who crushes resistance abroad can also reach the lands along the upper Nile. This is why the story of the executed leaders associated with the Takhsi campaign remains so disturbing and so important. It is not because ancient warfare elsewhere was gentle. It was not. It is because the royal record makes the punishment into theatre. The violence is staged as a lesson, and the lesson is meant to outlast the battlefield. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate the exact chronology, context, and textual relationships among Amenhotep II's military inscriptions. But the logic of the message is clear enough. The king does not merely defeat rebellion, he humiliates it, he makes it exemplary. He turns the defeated enemy into a sign placed at the edge of other people's choices. To modern ears, this sounds like cruelty, and it was cruel. But inside Egyptian royal ideology, the act is framed differently. The pharaoh is the defender of Mat, the ordered balance of the world. Foreign rebellion is not presented as a political disagreement or a local bid for freedom. It is described as disorder, insolence, chaos rising against the God-approved king. Once the enemy has been placed in that category, punishment becomes more than revenge. It becomes restoration. This is one of the most dangerous powers of sacred kingship. It can convert state violence into moral necessity. The more brutal the punishment, the stronger the claim that chaos has been crushed. Yet even this religious language does not erase the practical mind behind it. Amenhotep II's terror works because it is carefully communicative. An execution hidden in a camp would remove enemies. A displayed punishment sends a message to many more. A body placed in a major Egyptian city tells Egyptian audiences that the king has triumphed and foreign lands have failed. A body sent toward a frontier tells subject peoples that distance offers no safety. A text carved afterward makes the event permanent, available to memory long after flesh, fear, and eyewitnesses have vanished. This layered communication is what makes the rain feel so cold. It is not only the heat of battle, it is violence organized into policy. The same pattern appears in other tools of empire, though often less dramatically. Hostage-taking, deportation, the movement of foreign elites, tribute demands, the installation or confirmation of local rulers, and the display of captives all belong to the political grammar of the late Bronze Age. Egypt is not unique in using such methods, but Amenhotep II's surviving image gives them a fierce personal charge. The pharaoh is not shown as a distant administrator signing orders. He is the force that makes every order believable. A local prince may keep his throne, but only because Pharaoh allows it. A city may keep its walls, but only if it remembers what happens to those who force Egypt to return. The empire does not need to destroy every town. It needs every town to imagine destruction clearly enough. There is a lesser-known human mechanism here. Terror often depends on witnesses. Someone must see the punishment. Someone must carry the story. Someone must repeat it with enough detail to make it useful. In ancient imperial systems, this could happen through envoys, soldiers, merchants, scribes, local rulers, priests, and travellers who moved between courts and borderlands. Official inscriptions are only the polished surface of a wider rumour network. The fear produced by Amenhotep II's campaigns would not have lived only in carved stone. It would have lived in spoken reports, in warnings given behind closed doors, in the calculations of families and rulers who knew that rebellion could bring not only defeat but public disgrace. This is also where the silence of the non-Egyptian record becomes painful. The Egyptian text tells us what the king wanted the world to learn. It does not tell us how the threatened communities understood the warning in their own words. It does not preserve the thoughts of a local ruler deciding whether to resist, submit, delay, flatter, or flee. It does not preserve the fear of ordinary adults caught inside these political struggles. People whose lives depended on decisions made in palaces far above them. What survives in the record suggests a powerful empire managing its edges with calculated severity. But the emotional cost is mostly glimpsed through absence. We know the message because the victors carved it. We do not know all the lives it entered. Amenhotep II's terror therefore has two faces. One face looks outward, toward foreign lands. It says that Egypt's new king is not weaker than his father, not hesitant, not merely ceremonial, not safe to test. The other face looks inward, toward Egypt itself. It reassures priests, soldiers, officials, and elites that the throne remains strong. A new reign can be a moment of uncertainty inside the court as well as beyond the borders. Officials need to know that the man at the center can command obedience. Temples need a king who can provide offerings and victories. Military elites need a ruler whose reputation gives meaning to their service. By displaying foreign punishment, Amenhotep II strengthens his image at home as much as abroad. This may help explain why the brutality is not hidden. The violence is part of the king's brand of legitimacy. In a more fragile ruler, cruelty might signal panic. In Amenhotep II's official image, cruelty is made to signal control. The inscriptions do not tremble. They announce. They turn horror into order by placing it inside the structure of divine kingship. The king acts, the enemy falls, the frontier learns, the god is satisfied, Egypt remains whole. It is a terrifyingly clean story. And like many clean imperial stories, it is built by removing much of the human mess. Still, even the sharpest terror cannot solve every problem forever. Fear can suppress rebellion, but it can also reveal how much effort suppression requires. The very need to display punishment suggests that loyalty is not natural or permanent. It must be renewed through force, wealth, diplomacy, ritual, and narrative. Amenhotep II's reign stands at the meeting point of all these methods. He inherits an empire made by campaigns, and he maintains it with a language that makes fear seem like stability. The terror behind his reign is not random darkness along the Nile. It is the shadow cast by imperial order, when order is defended through spectacle, when the king's power must be seen, remembered, and feared long after the army has gone. South of Thebes, the Nile changes its mood. The river narrows, twists, and presses itself between harsher banks, moving toward cataracts, deserts, gold fields, and older memories of kingdoms Egypt never fully forgot. Nubia is not a passive background to Amenhotep II's reign. It is one of the deep engines of Egyptian power, a region bound to the throne by fortresses, officials, temples, military roads, mining expeditions, and the constant movement of wealth northward. If Syria-Palestine is the frontier where Egypt must negotiate with crowded cities and rival great powers, Nubia is the frontier where Egypt's grip tightens around resources that help make New Kingdom kingship glitter. Gold from the south does not merely enrich the palace, it feeds temples, diplomacy, royal display, and the entire performance of divine abundance. Amenhotep II inherits this southern world as part of the imperial structure built and strengthened before him. Egyptian control in Nubia has a long and layered history, and by the 18th dynasty it is administered through powerful offices, especially the viceroy of Kush, who acts as the king's arm in the south. Such officials are not minor provincial servants. They stand between the pharaoh and a vast region of strategic importance, responsible for tribute, labor, security, temple interests, and the management of local populations under Egyptian authority. Their stelae inscriptions show a world where royal commands are translated into frontier policy, and where the language of obedience can become severe. The pharaoh may be far away, but the official voice insists that his power is immediate. Nubia matters because it reveals that Amenhotep II's terror is not only northern. The dramatic punishment connected with the Takhsi campaign is especially striking because one of its messages is directed southward. A body from a northern war, in the royal account, can be used to instruct a southern frontier. This is imperial imagination at its most chilling. The king's violence is not local, it is transferable. A defeated leader from Syria becomes a warning to Nubia. Geography collapses into symbolism. The pharaoh's enemies may live in different lands, speak different languages, follow different rulers, and resist for different reasons. But in Egyptian royal ideology, they can all be folded into one category: those who disturb the order guaranteed by the king. What survives in the record suggests that this was not accidental. Egypt's southern frontier had to be constantly reminded of hierarchy, because Nubia was not simply a mine with people conveniently absent. It was a lived landscape with communities, traditions, local leaders, desert knowledge, river expertise, and older political identities. Egyptian texts often reduce Nubia to tribute, gold, captives, and obedience. But the human reality was much richer. People farmed where the river allowed it, moved through desert routes, tended animals, worked in and around Egyptian installations, served in military and administrative networks, and negotiated life beneath a foreign imperial structure. The evidence remains incomplete, but the traces are enough to show that domination required daily management, not just occasional ceremony. The gold itself has a strange double life. In Egyptian religious thought and royal art, gold is the flesh of the gods, a substance of brilliance, permanence, and divine radiance. It covers sacred images and royal objects, catching light in sanctuaries where ordinary eyes may rarely enter. But before gold becomes theology, it is geology and labour. It comes from difficult landscapes, from mining zones, from expeditions that require food, water, tools, guards, scribes, and workers. It passes through hands that are rarely celebrated in royal texts. By the time it shines on a shrine, the desert has been erased from it. Amenhotep II's divine splendour depends on this hidden chain. The beauty of the court and the harshness of extraction belong to the same system. Fortresses and administrative centres help hold that system together. Egypt's Nubian presence is built not only through military force, but through architecture placed strategically along the river and routes. Fortified settlements, temples, storage areas, and official residences create islands of Egyptian order in a region that the crown wishes to define as subordinate. Temples are especially important because they do more than house gods. They Egyptianize the landscape symbolically. When the pharaoh builds, restores, or appears in ritual scenes in Nubia, He is not simply honouring divinity, he is marking space. He is saying that the gods of Egypt sanction his presence here, that the Nile's southern reaches belong inside the sacred geography of the crown. This is why the falcon image connected with Amenhotep II feels so appropriate. The royal falcon is not merely a bird, it is height, vision, speed, and divine kingship compressed into a living form. Horus watches from above. The king, associated with the falcon, sees farther than ordinary men, strikes suddenly, and stands between earth and sky. New research and conservation attention around a falcon linked to Amenhotep II remind us that royal symbolism is not frozen in textbooks. It continues to be studied through material objects, pigments, restoration histories, and museum lives. A carved or painted falcon can look serene, even beautiful, but its meaning in the ancient world is edged with authority. The falcon does not ask the landscape to obey, it descends. In Nubia, such symbolism would have carried a political weight. Egyptian rule often presented itself as the extension of divine order into lands imagined as needing control. This framing served the Egyptian state well, but it also hides the perspective of those being controlled. A temple relief can show the pharaoh smiting enemies in a posture repeated across centuries, yet repetition should not make the image harmless. Its familiarity is part of its power. It teaches viewers again and again that foreign bodies exist beneath the king's raised arm, that the ruler's violence is ancient, correct, and God-supported. Scholars still debate the exact relationship between image, ritual, and real political practice in each context. But the repeated message is unmistakable: the king protects order by dominating those placed outside it. Amenhotep II's Nubia is therefore a land of both wealth and warning. The river carries resources north, but it also carries royal ideology south. Officials like the Viceroy of Kush operate within this current, presenting themselves as loyal servants of the pharaoh and guardians of his southern interests. Their monuments speak in the formal language of obedience, achievement, and royal favour. Yet behind that formal language one can sense the constant pressure of the frontier. Orders must be enforced, tribute must arrive, labour must be organised, local unrest, even if only faintly visible in the surviving record, must be prevented or punished. The empire's southern wealth is too important to leave unsecured. The surprising thing is how deeply Nubia is woven into the grandeur of Egypt's centre. A visitor standing before a shining temple object in Thebes, or imagining a royal ceremony filled with gold and incense, might not immediately think of desert tracks, mining labour, fortified posts, or governors sending reports from the south. But the connection is there. Amenhotep II's ability to appear magnificent before Amun is tied to Nubia's extraction. His ability to reward institutions, maintain royal splendour, and participate in international diplomacy is strengthened by southern resources. Even the language of terror that moves from a northern battlefield toward Nubia shows how interconnected the empire has become. One frontier speaks to another because both are part of the same imperial body. And yet, as with Syria-Palestine, the pharaoh's record is not the whole truth. Nubia under Amenhotep II is visible mostly through Egyptian eyes, through the administrative and symbolic needs of the conqueror. The people who lived under that system are not entirely voiceless, but their voices are harder to hear. They appear through archaeology, burial patterns, settlement traces, material culture, and the stubborn survival of local identities beneath Egyptian forms. No single explanation fully accounts for how individuals experience this domination. Some may have served and benefited within Egyptian structures, others may have endured them. Many likely did both at different moments, because life under empire is rarely simple. By looking south, Amenhotep II's reign becomes larger and darker. His terror is no longer only the memory of a campaign in Asia, it becomes part of a wider method of ruling an empire whose wealth depends on distant lands remaining obedient. The Nile that gleams below Thebes is not only a river of fertility and sacred renewal, it is a road of extraction, command, and warning. It carries gold, orders, offerings, and fear. Under the falcon's gaze, Nubia reminds us that Amenhotep II's power was built not merely on battlefield spectacle, but on the long, disciplined pressure of imperial control. Behind the image of Amenhotep II as archer, charioteer, hunter, and punishing king, there stands another Amenhotep II, quieter but no less important, the ruler sustained by monuments, priests, officials, workshops, kitchens, storehouses, tomb builders, and the slow machinery of sacred memory. An empire can be frightened by campaigns, but a reign cannot live by terror alone. It must be fed every morning in ritual. It must be carved into stone where gods can see it. It must appear in temples, on stelae, in statues, in foundation deposits, in administrative records, in the rhythm of offerings, and eventually in the tomb where the dead king is prepared for a different kind of rule. The warrior image may strike first, but the monument makes it last. Amenhotep II's world is one in which kingship is constructed again and again through sacred architecture. Temples are not silent ruins in his time. They are active places, controlled, staffed, scented, guarded, and supplied. Priests enter spaces ordinary people do not enter. Divine statues are washed, clothed, fed, and carried. Offerings arrive as bread, beer, meat, birds, vegetables, incense, oil, flowers, and precious materials. Scribes track deliveries. Workers repair rooms, clean courtyards, tend fires, and move through the back spaces of sacred buildings where eternity depends on very earthly labour. The pharaoh appears on the walls as the perfect worshipper, but the smooth relief hides an entire system of people whose daily tasks keep the relationship between king and god alive. This matters for Amenhotep II because his violent image must be balanced by piety. A pharaoh who only destroys would be dangerous even to his own ideology. He must also give. He must kneel, offer, build, restore, and show devotion to Amun and the other gods who authorize his power. In one mode, he is the weapon of Egypt. In another, he is the servant of divine order, hands lifted with offerings, body controlled in ritual humility. These images are not contradictions to the Egyptian mind. They are two halves of the same kingship. The king destroys chaos outside the ordered world and nourishes the gods at its center. Violence and worship become part of one sacred circuit. The material traces of his reign help soften, complicate, and deepen the harshness of the war record. There are statues of Amenhotep II kneeling before the divine, presenting vessels, showing the king not in the moment of attack but in a posture of offering. There are stelae that preserve him before Amun, their limestone once touched with pigment, reminding us that Egyptian monuments were not originally bare museum-coloured stone, but living surfaces of red, blue, yellow, black, white, and green. There are small objects connected to his name, fragments of elite material culture, royal symbols carried into portable form. There are traces from his tomb and mortuary world that speak not of conquest but of afterlife, protection, transformation, and the hope that royal identity could survive death. The temple of millions of years associated with Amenhotep II on the west bank at Luxor opens another view into his reign. A royal mortuary temple is often imagined only as a grand ceremonial building, but archaeology reveals something more textured. Around such a temple there are annexes, rooms of storage and work, places where food is prepared, where animals are processed, where people eat, discard, repair, record, and continue the practical business of maintaining a royal cult. Faunal remains from economic areas near Amenhotep II's temple, along with traces of ovens, ostraca, and working spaces, bring the king's eternal image down into the grainy reality of daily life. The godlike pharaoh depends on kitchens, the immortal cult depends on bones left after meals. The sacred economy leaves behind ash, scraps, and writing on broken pottery. This is one of the most surprising and useful details for understanding ancient power. The more eternal the monument claims to be, the more ordinary labour it requires. Amenhotep II's name may stand at the centre, but around that name are bakers, butchers, potters, scribes, priests, doorkeepers, herdsmen, gardeners, boatmen, and officials whose combined work turns royal memory into a functioning institution. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate the exact organization of temple economies in many cases, but what survives in the record suggests a world where religion, labor, food supply, and royal ideology are tightly bound. The pharaoh is remembered by stone, but stone alone does not remember. People make it remember. Court officials are part of this hidden structure. A king like Amenhotep II does not personally manage every estate, shipment, inscription, quarry, border order, or temple delivery. Officials stand between his command and the world. They translate royal will into action. They supervise projects, lead expeditions, manage scribes, govern regions, and attach their own careers to the king's success. Their loyalty is not merely emotional, it is institutional. To serve a powerful pharaoh is to gain status, wealth, burial privilege, and proximity to the divine center of the state. But service also means helping to produce the royal image. Officials make the king visible by building the systems through which his name appears everywhere. Temple politics sits beneath this process like deep water. Amun's priesthood and the great religious estates have grown powerful in the 18th dynasty, enriched by royal gifts and imperial success. Amenhotep II must honour Amun because Amun's favour is central to his legitimacy. But every gift to a temple also strengthens an institution with its own interests, personnel, and memory. The relationship between crown and temple is not simply one of ruler and servant. It is a partnership filled with mutual dependence. The king needs divine approval, ritual performance, and sacred places where his victories can be transformed into cosmic order. The temples need royal support, protection, endowments, and the flow of wealth that empire provides. No single explanation fully accounts for the balance of influence in every reign. But the direction is clear. Amenhotep II's power is inseparable from religious institutions that help turn his rule into eternity. The falcon symbol deepens that sacred structure. The royal falcon, linked to Horus and the living king, makes kingship appear airborne, watchful, and predatory. Recent attention to a falcon associated with Amenhotep II reminds us that even a single emblem can hold many layers: royal theology, artistic technique, ancient colour, modern restoration, museum history, and the changing questions scholars bring to old objects. A falcon can seem still, almost gentle, when displayed today. In its ancient setting, it would have carried the force of divine sovereignty. It made the king more than a man seated in a palace. It made him the earthly form of a god who sees from above and strikes from height. This sacred image does not cancel the terror already seen in the campaign record. It explains how that terror could be made acceptable to the system that celebrated it. Amenhotep. The second's monuments do not ask viewers to separate worship from war. They fuse them. The same hands that offer vessels to Amun can be imagined drawing the bow against enemies. The same king who kneels in ritual can stand in the chariot. The same rain that leaves behind evidence of kitchens and temple meals also leaves behind the memory of displayed bodies and imperial fear. This mixture can feel jarring now, but in the new kingdom it is part of the deep logic of rule. Behind the monuments, then, Amenhotep II becomes less like a single violent figure and more like the center of a vast ritual machine. He is made by training, crowned by succession, proven by campaign, enriched by empire, sanctified by temples, served by officials, fed by economies, preserved by artists, and finally hidden in a tomb. His terror is real in the record, but it is only one face of a more complex royal system. To understand him, one must follow not only the blood on the road to Takhsi, but also the smoke rising from temple kitchens, the pigment on limestone, the careful posture of a kneeling statue, and the quiet, scribal hand that turns a king's life into a memory strong enough to outlast the man. The royal image of Amenhotep II becomes sharpest when it gathers around two things that change the feel of power in the late Bronze Age: the chariot and the bow. These are not minor details of equipment. They belong to an entire world of speed, training, status, and controlled violence. A king standing in a chariot with a bow in his hand is not simply a fighter. He is an emblem of movement across distance, of elite discipline, of animals, craftsmen, imported ideas, and imperial wealth all fused into a single spectacle. When Amenhotep II presents himself as a master of these arts, he is presenting more than a hobby. He is showing that his body belongs at the highest point of the military culture that sustains Egypt's empire. The chariot itself is a marvel of concentrated complexity. To modern eyes it may look light, almost fragile, a platform on wheels pulled by horses, but in the world of Amenhotep II, that lightness is the achievement. Wood must be shaped with skill. Wheels must be built to endure movement over uneven ground. Leather, rawhide, glue, fittings, reins, yokes, and harnesses must all work together. Horses require breeding, training, feeding, medical care, and expert handling. A chariot team is never just one man and two animals. It is a system of grooms, stable masters, craftsmen, drivers, bowmen, armourers, scribes, and supply networks that allow the elite warrior to appear swift and effortless. The king's chariot is therefore a moving summary of the state itself, elegant on the surface, labour-intensive underneath. Amenhotep II's fascination with horses and chariotry fits the international mood of his age. Across the eastern Mediterranean and Near East, horses and chariots are markers of prestige among rulers and warrior elites. They appear in warfare, diplomacy, gift exchange, training culture, and royal boasting. A king who controls fine horses controls speed. A king who trains with chariots shows that he can participate in the shared aristocratic language of the late Bronze Age. Egypt, once less dependent on such technologies in earlier periods, has fully absorbed them into the display of New Kingdom power. By Amenhotep II's reign, the chariot is no longer foreign novelty. It is royal identity on wheels. The bow gives that identity its reach. The composite bow, made from different materials working together under tension, is one of the most important weapons of the chariot age. It stores power in a compact form. It can be used from a moving platform by a trained archer. It requires strength, but not strength alone. It demands rhythm, balance, timing, and endless practice. In a chariot, the archer must adjust to motion, terrain, the movement of horses, and the shifting distance of targets. The royal claim that Amenhotep II could shoot with unmatched force is therefore not only a claim about muscle, it is a claim about mastery over instability. The world moves, the horses surge, the wheels shake, the target appears, and the king still releases the arrow cleanly. This is why the famous stories of Amenhotep II's archery feats carry such ideological weight. The image of the king piercing difficult targets, sometimes described in traditions involving metal or unusually resistant marks, is built to feel almost impossible. Scholars still debate how literally the detail should be taken, and the evidence remains shaped by royal exaggeration. But the performance does not need to be ordinary truth to be historically meaningful. It is official truth. It says that Amenhotep II can do what others cannot. His companions fail or fall short. He succeeds. The target becomes a test not only of skill but of legitimacy. A weaker man could inherit golden titles. Only a truly royal body favoured by the gods can bend the world to his strength. There is a dry irony in this image. The king's body is praised as singular, but every part of the scene depends on collective labour. Someone makes the bow, someone maintains the chariot, someone trains the horses, someone prepares the practice ground, someone records the feat in language worthy of a godlike ruler. The very image of unmatched individual strength is manufactured by a society. Amenhotep II may indeed have been unusually athletic, and what survives in the record suggests that physical prowess was central to how he wished to be remembered. But the royal body is never alone. It stands on the invisible work of the court. The chariot and bow also alter the emotional atmosphere of war. Older images of battle can suggest direct contact bodies meeting bodies, shields, spears, axes, the press of men. Chariot archery creates a different kind of terror. It brings speed, distance, and suddenness. The enemy can be struck before closing. Dust rises. Horses move quickly. Wheels cut across open ground. Arrows arrive from a platform that seems to pass almost as quickly as it appears. In royal art, this becomes the perfect form of pharaonic domination. The king does not struggle inside chaos. He rides above it, through it, controlling it, while enemies collapse into disorder below. Of course, real battle was never as clean as temple reliefs suggest. Chariots could break, horses could panic or tire, terrain could limit movement, supply problems could slow an army, weather, disease, intelligence failures, and local resistance could undo confidence. The evidence remains incomplete, and Egyptian victory inscriptions rarely dwell on inconvenience unless it can be turned into a greater triumph. But the ideal still matters. Amenhotep II's official self-image depends on turning the uncertainty of battle into the certainty of royal performance. The more unpredictable war actually is, the more important it becomes to carve the king as perfectly in control. Training for this world must have been relentless. Elite chariotry is not improvised. The body learns how to stand, shift weight, draw, aim, and release while moving. The hands learn reins and weapons. The eye learns distance. The horses learn commands, noise, pressure, and coordination. The driver and fighter must move almost as one unit. When Amenhotep II's texts emphasize his athletic excellence, they are not describing a decorative king playing at war. They are drawing on a real culture of practice, yet they also inflate that practice into mythic proportion. The king is not simply trained, he is incomparable. This cultivated image feeds directly into imperial rule. A ruler who masters the bow can strike from afar. An empire must do the same. A chariot crosses space quickly. Egypt must project power across long distances. Horses must obey signals. Foreign rulers must obey commands. The whole military technology becomes a metaphor for government. Amenhotep II's body, balanced in the chariot, becomes the empire's fantasy of itself mobile, disciplined, swift, precise, and terrifying to those who stand in its path. But the chariot also points to a hidden vulnerability. Elite warfare is expensive. Horses consume resources. Chariot forces require maintenance. Specialized military culture depends on stable supply and administration. The splendor of Amenhotep II's warrior image reveals the strength of Egypt, but also its dependence on complex systems. If the roads fail, if the stables weaken, if craftsmen disappear, if officials cannot coordinate provisions, the royal image loses its practical foundation. No single explanation fully accounts for the endurance or fragility of late Bronze Age empires, but their beauty often rests on delicate structures. A chariot wheel looks graceful until it breaks. In Amenhotep II's reign, however, the machine still works. The king's inscriptions show him at the height of the system, drawing the bow with terrifying ease, riding in the polished mythology of the chariot age, turning athletic display into political warning. The prince trained for strength has become a ruler whose weapons are not only bronze, wood, horn, sinew, and horseflesh. His weapons are also images. He fires arrows into targets, but the deeper target is doubt itself. Doubt among foreign rulers, doubt among Egyptian elites, doubt that the empire after Thutmose III can still move fast and strike hard. In the figure of Amenhotep II, bow drawn and chariot rolling, Egypt answers with a vision of power so controlled that even violence appears disciplined. Every empire has a geography of silence. The maps and monuments show roads, tribute routes, conquered towns, frontier posts, and the long reach of royal command. But they rarely preserve the inner lives of the people who lived beneath that reach. Amenhotep II's inscriptions are full of enemies, yet those enemies are usually not allowed to remain fully human. They appear as rebels, chiefs, Asiatics, Nubians, defeated ones, bound ones. People whose role is to prove the king's strength by collapsing before it. Their names, when they survive at all, are often trapped inside Egyptian categories. Their cities become markers in a royal itinerary. Their resistance becomes disorder. Their defeat becomes decoration. The pharaoh's voice is loud because it was carved to be loud, and the voices facing him are faint because the machinery of the empire did not exist to preserve them. This imbalance is one of the most important truths about Amenhotep II's reign. The surviving record does not simply tell us what happened. It tells us who had the power to make events durable. A local ruler in Syria-Palestine may have had reasons for resisting Egypt that made perfect sense within his own world. He may have been balancing pressure from neighboring rulers, older obligations, economic strain, fear of rivals, or hope that a new pharaoh could be tested in the Egyptian inscription. Those reasons vanish. He becomes a rebel against divine order. A Nubian community living under Egyptian administration may have experienced imperial rule through taxes, labor demands, cultural pressure, opportunity, danger, and negotiation. in the royal text, Nubia becomes a land of tribute and obedience, useful for gold and useful as a stage for Pharaoh's warning. The people Egypt fought were not shadows waiting at the edge of civilization. Syria-Palestine in the late Bronze Age was a dense human landscape of walled towns, agricultural lands, trade routes, temples, courts, and local dynasties. Its rulers lived in a world crowded by larger powers, where Egypt was only one of the forces that mattered. To submit to Egypt could bring protection and prestige, but it also brought obligation. Tribute had to be paid, loyalty had to be performed. Political independence narrowed. A ruler who bowed might survive, while a ruler who resisted might be crushed. Yet obedience itself could feel like another kind of defeat. The Egyptian court preferred to describe submission as natural because Pharaoh's power was rightful. But on the ground, loyalty was likely more uneasy, more strategic, and more fragile than the monuments admit. Nubia presents a different but equally complex silence. Egyptian sources often speak of the south through the language of resources, forts, and command. But Nubia was not an empty corridor of gold. It had its own communities, local identities, landscapes of memory, and long traditions of interaction with Egypt that included trade, conflict, imitation, adaptation, and resistance. Under New Kingdom domination, some Nubians entered Egyptian systems as soldiers, workers, officials, or collaborators. Others lived under the weight of those systems without leaving written accounts of their own. Archaeology can reveal traces of houses, graves, pottery, diet, settlement patterns, and cultural mixture, but it cannot always tell us what people thought when Egyptian officials arrived, or when royal ideology described their world as a possession of the pharaoh. This is why the enemy in Amenhotep II's record must be read carefully. The enemy is often a literary and political construction. He may be based on real opponents, real battles, real prisoners, and real suffering, but once placed inside Egyptian royal language, he is transformed into an object of meaning. Bound captives are not shown as individuals with histories. They are arranged into a visual grammar of domination. Foreign bodies appear beneath the king's feet or before the king's weapon. Their posture teaches hierarchy. Their difference marks the boundary between Egyptian order and the outside world. In this system, the enemy is not only defeated, he is made useful after defeat, turned into proof that the pharaoh has restored balance. There is a strange coldness in how efficient this visual language is. A whole region can be reduced to a row of names. A political crisis can become a triumphant phrase. A terrifying punishment can become a statement of royal vigour. The victims do not need long biographies for the monument to work. In fact, their lack of biography helps the message. The less specific they are, the more easily they can stand for all resistance. Amenhotep II's enemies are made interchangeable in the royal imagination, not because they were the same in life, but because empire benefits from simplifying those it dominates. Complexity invites sympathy. Symbols invite obedience. Yet the silence is not complete. Sometimes it can be felt precisely because the official record works so hard to control the story. When Amenhotep II's texts boast of punishment, the boast reveals anxiety as well as confidence. A ruler does not display terror unless he believes terror has an audience. A frontier does not need warnings unless obedience could fail. A king does not insist so intensely on his strength unless strength must be proven. What survives in the record suggests that Egypt's enemies were not merely passive recipients of pharaonic power. They acted, tested, resisted, negotiated, submitted, and recalculated. The royal inscriptions flatten them, but they cannot erase the fact that the empire had to respond. The unnamed soldiers on both sides deepen the silence. Egyptian campaigns were not fought by the king alone. Despite the heroic image, men marched, drove chariots, handled horses, carried supplies, guarded prisoners, repaired equipment, and endured heat, thirst, fatigue, and fear. Foreign defenders stood behind walls, watched roads, sent messages, and made decisions under pressure. The official story pulls everything toward the royal centre, but battle is always experienced by many bodies. No single explanation fully accounts for how those individuals understood the violence around them. Some Egyptian soldiers may have believed deeply in the king's divine mission. Others may have thought mostly of survival, reward, duty, or the hope of returning home. The record rarely lets them speak. The same is true of captives and deportees, whose movement through imperial systems could reshape lives in ways that are difficult to reconstruct. Ancient states often used forced relocation, hostage arrangements, and the movement of skilled people or elite family members as tools of control. Egypt participated in this broader world of managed human movement. For the court, such practices could be described as bringing foreign lands under order. For those moved, the experience may have meant loss, adaptation, opportunity, coercion, or some mixture too complex for a royal inscription to admit. The evidence remains incomplete, but the traces of foreign people in Egypt and Egyptian influence abroad remind us that empire was lived not only on battlefields but in households, workshops, courts, and temples far from a person's place of origin. Amenhotep II's reign is therefore haunted by people who appear only at the edge of the light. The pharaoh stands in full glare, muscles sharpened by praise, bow drawn, chariot rolling, gods behind him. Around him the court arranges words that make his violence seem necessary and his enemies seem destined to fall. But beyond that glare are the shadowed lives of those who had to hear the news of his campaigns, weigh the danger of his anger, send tribute, bend policy, endure officials, or disappear into categories carved by someone else. They're not easy to recover, and the historian must resist pretending that imagination can replace evidence. Still, their absence is part of the story. It reminds us that the terror of Amenhotep II's reign was not only what the king did or claimed to do, it was also the way imperial memory tried to decide who mattered enough to be remembered. As the royal record carries Amenhotep II forward, the enemies remain mostly nameless, but the silence around them grows heavier. It presses against the polished confidence of the inscriptions. It complicates every boast. It turns every victory scene into a question about who is missing from the frame. The pharaoh's voice survives because stone favoured him. The others survive in fragments, in archaeology, in cautious inference, in the spaces where official language becomes too smooth. And through that silence, the empire looks less like a simple triumph and more like a vast human field where fear, ambition, loyalty, resistance, and erasure all move beneath the same burning sun. The silence around Amenhotep II's enemies has another echo inside Egypt itself, closer to the throne, where the royal family moves behind curtains of ceremony and partial evidence. A pharaoh's public image is made to look absolute, as if kingship descends from heaven in a straight beam of light, touching one chosen man and leaving no room for uncertainty. But dynasties are human structures. They contain fathers, sons, wives, secondary wives, court factions, officials, priests, memories, rival expectations, and the quiet danger that always gathers around succession. Amenhotep II inherits a great empire from Thutmose III, and later he passes the crown to Thutmose IV. But the path between those names is not as clear as royal ideology wants it to appear. The monuments prefer certainty. History finds shadows. Amenhotep II's own rise already carries the pressure of comparison. He follows a father whose military reputation is enormous, and that alone would have been enough to make legitimacy a delicate matter. But legitimacy in the 18th dynasty is not only a question of blood, it is a question of divine approval, maternal status, court recognition, priestly support, military credibility, and the ability to make the transfer of power appear inevitable after the fact. Egyptian kingship works hard to erase uncertainty once a ruler is safely on the throne. The new pharaoh becomes the one chosen by the gods from the beginning, the one always meant to rule, the one whose body and name now reorganize memory around themselves. If there had been rival possibilities, hesitation, or political maneuvering, the official record rarely feels obliged to preserve them. This is why the family world of Amenhotep II must be approached cautiously. We know names, relationships, titles, monuments, and fragments, but not the full emotional or political life of the palace. Royal women matter deeply, yet their visibility shifts depending on reign, title, and later commemoration. Queen Tia, associated with Amenhotep II and remembered as the mother of Thutmose IV, becomes especially important through her son's kingship. But the exact shape of her status during Amenhotep II's lifetime has been discussed carefully by scholars. The evidence remains incomplete. What survives does not allow a neat palace drama in which every alliance is known and every ambition can be narrated with confidence. Instead, the record gives us glimpses, names attached to objects, titles in inscriptions, funerary traces, and the later importance of a mother whose son becomes king. The next pharaoh, Thutmose IV, stands at the center of the mystery. His famous dream stela, set between the paws of the great Sphinx at Giza, tells a story of divine selection. In that account, the prince rests near the Sphinx, receives a promise of kingship, and later clears the monument as part of a sacred exchange. The tale is powerful because it makes the throne appear granted by the god through a private, miraculous encounter. But its very power has invited suspicion. Some scholars have wondered whether the story hints that Thutmose IV was not the most obvious heir, and therefore needed an unusually strong divine narrative to support his legitimacy. This interpretation is tempting, but it must remain careful. The stela does not openly confess a succession crisis. It offers royal theology, not court minutes. Still, the need to emphasize divine choice may tell us something about the atmosphere surrounding his rise. In the world shaped by Amenhotep II, that atmosphere would have mattered enormously. A king who presents himself as a superhuman warrior and terror of rebels must also secure the future of his line. Victory abroad means little if the palace becomes uncertain at home. Succession is the place where the divine mask of kingship meets the biology and politics of a family. Princes may be born to different royal women. Some may die before ruling. Some may hold titles that bring them near the center and then vanish from the record. Some may have been suitable in theory but not chosen in fact. Egyptian history often leaves these possible lives in fragments, because the successful successor absorbs the light. The others become names in tombs, damaged inscriptions, or quiet absences. Amenhotep II's court must have known that continuity was essential. The empire he inherited was large, but large empires are sensitive to rumor. Foreign rulers who hesitate at the death of one king may hesitate again at the approach of another succession. Nubian officials, Asiatic vassals, temple elites, military officers, and palace administrators all need to know that the royal line remains stable. The stronger the king's image, the more carefully his death must be managed. A pharaoh can spend his life claiming that his power is divine and irresistible, but when his body fails, the system must transfer that divine force into another body without letting the illusion break. This is one of the quiet tensions behind New Kingdom monarchy. The pharaoh is presented as unique, incomparable, the sole living Horus, yet kingship must be repeatable. One godlike ruler must be replaced by another. The old king's victories must not become a burden that crushes the new. Amenhotep II himself had faced this after Thutmose III, and Thutmose IV would face it after Amenhotep II. Each transition requires a reshaping of memory. The predecessor must be honoured but also surpassed or renewed. The successor must belong to the line but also prove that the gods have turned fully toward him. The royal family is therefore not merely domestic background. It is part of the machinery of empire, marriages, titles, maternal identities, and the public role of queens help organize legitimacy. Royal women may appear in ritual scenes, funerary contexts, and titles that connect them to the king's divine and dynastic identity. Their political influence is often hard to measure directly, because the record does not always preserve the mechanisms of their power, but absence from the louder military record should not be mistaken for insignificance. A queen mother can become essential to a son's kingship. A royal wife's title can strengthen a prince's claim. A palace relationship can shape the future without ever appearing in the triumphant language of battle. A lesser-known detail of Amenhotep II's dynasty is how much later discovery has shaped modern imagination of his family. Tombs, mummies, reused burial spaces, and scattered objects have made the royal house feel both intimate and unreachable. Names survive beside bodies whose identities can be debated. Burial arrangements can suggest status, but they do not always explain the political story behind that status. The dead are preserved more securely than their motives. This gives the dynasty an almost ghostly quality. We can stand near the material remains of kings and royal relatives, yet still fail to know what they feared, expected, or contested while alive. Thutmose IV's rise does not appear to have shattered the empire, which suggests that whatever uncertainties existed were successfully contained or later smoothed over. He inherits the throne and continues the line that will eventually lead toward Amenhotep III, and then to the more radical upheavals associated with Akhenaten. Looking backward, Amenhotep II's reign begins to sit at an important hinge. He is a king of hard imperial maintenance, a ruler who turns inherited conquest into fearsome continuity, but after him, the dynasty gradually changes its emphasis. Military memory remains important, yet diplomacy, luxury, solar theology, artistic transformation, and the growing complexity of royal religion will begin to reshape the tone of kingship. The seeds are not simple, and no single explanation fully accounts for the later Amarna age. But the line passes through Amenhotep II's house. The dynasty of shadows around him reminds us that terror abroad and uncertainty at home are not separate stories. A king who must prove himself to foreign lands must also prove that his bloodline can carry power forward. A court that carves enemies into silence may also leave its own internal tensions only half visible. Amenhotep II's monuments show a ruler who wants no ambiguity. He is strong, chosen, victorious, feared. But dynastic history is made of ambiguities. It is made of people close to power whose lives survive unevenly, of succession stories turned into divine narratives, of sons who inherit and others who disappear, of queens whose importance glows more clearly after the fact. Beneath the hard surface of Amenhotep II's reign, the royal house moves like a shadow behind painted walls, preparing the next transformation of Egypt before the old king has even entered the tomb. The shadows of succession lead back to the force that makes every Egyptian throne appear more than human: the gods. Amenhotep II does not rule in a world where politics can be separated from sacred order. His power is not presented as the outcome of military training, dynastic inheritance, court support, and administrative strength alone, even though all of those things matter deeply. In the official imagination of Egypt, the pharaoh rules because the divine world has placed him at the center of earthly order. He is the living Horus, beloved of Amun, son of Re, the one whose breath, strength, victories, and years are granted by powers older than any dynasty. This sacred frame is not ornamental. It is the structure that allows conquest, punishment, taxation, temple building, and royal succession to appear as parts of one cosmic duty. Amenhotep II's violent image becomes much more understandable and much more unsettling when seen through this religious lens. The pharaoh does not describe foreign resistance as a political problem in the modern sense. He does not present rebellious rulers as rival strategists with their own local interests. The royal language pushes them into a moral and cosmic category. They become disorder. They become the people who disturb Ma'at, the balanced order that Egypt imagines itself as preserving against chaos. Once enemies are framed this way, the king's force becomes more than force. It becomes divine correction. The arrow, the chariot, the execution, the displayed body, the tribute procession, the temple offering, all can be made to belong to the same sacred rhythm. Chaos rises, Pharaoh strikes, order returns, the gods receive their due. This is the central transformation behind Amenhotep II's terror. Fear is not allowed to look like mere fear. It is dressed in theology. The king's anger becomes the anger of a cosmic defender. His physical strength becomes a gift from the gods. His victories become proof that the gods support him. His punishments become examples of what happens when the world resists its proper arrangement. In this system, violence is not hidden outside religion. It is brought into religion and purified by it. That does not make it less brutal. It makes it more powerful, because it gives brutality a language that can be celebrated in temples. Amun stands especially large in this world. By the 18th dynasty, Amun of Thebes has become a god of immense royal importance, enriched by victories, offerings, estates, and the prestige of imperial success. Kings present themselves before Amun not simply as worshippers, but as sons and chosen agents. Amun grants kingship, Amun grants strength, Amun receives the riches of conquered lands. When Amenhotep II offers to Amun, the scene is not a quiet private devotion. It is a political statement carved into sacred form. The king gives the god what empire has gathered, and the god gives the king the legitimacy to gather more. The circuit is elegant and also severe. The temples make this circuit visible every day. Inside them, priests perform rituals that ordinary people do not witness directly, tending divine statues as living presences. Offerings are placed, words are spoken, purity is guarded, and the hidden body of the god is cared for. Outside or on temple walls, the king appears again and again as the perfect ritual actor, even though priests conduct much of the daily work in practice. This visual fiction matters. It keeps the king eternally present in sacred service. Even when Amenhotep II is campaigning, governing from another city, or eventually dead, his image continues to offer, receive, strike, and triumph on the temple wall. Stone allows kingship to be everywhere at once. This sacred everywhere is essential for an empire. Amenhotep II cannot personally stand in Nubia, Syria-Palestine, Memphis, Thebes, and every temple court at the same time. But his image can multiply, his cartouche can travel, his stele can speak, his statues can kneel, his victory scenes can repeat the defeat of enemies in spaces where the gods watch eternally. In the human world, armies must move and officials must send messages. In the symbolic world, the king's power is made constant. The temple wall becomes a kind of sacred frontier post, guarding not a road but an idea, the idea that Pharaoh's domination is woven into the order of creation. The falcon symbolism surrounding Amenhotep II strengthens this idea. The king as Horus is not merely a ruler with divine approval, he is the earthly embodiment of a divine pattern. The falcon sees from above, strikes from above, and belongs to the sky while ruling over the land. Such imagery fits a king obsessed with speed, strength, and predatory mastery. It also connects his earthly violence to an ancient mythic structure. The falcon does not negotiate with chaos, it descends. In modern museum light, a falcon associated with Amenhotep II may appear as an object of craftsmanship, conservation, pigment, and art history. In its ancient setting, it would have helped charge the king's identity with sacred force. The beautiful object and the terrifying message are not opposites, they are intertwined. Yet scholars still debate how ordinary Egyptians, foreign subjects, and even elites experience this ideology in daily life. The official scenes are clear in what they proclaim, but belief is harder to measure than carving. Some viewers may have accepted the royal image deeply. Others may have understood it as the necessary language of power. Foreign rulers compelled to send tribute may not have believed in Amun's cosmic right to rule them. But they still had to act as if the pharaoh's world mattered. Egyptian officials may have served the ideology sincerely while also benefiting materially from it. The evidence remains incomplete, and it would be too simple to imagine a single emotional response across the whole empire. Sacred kingship worked not because everyone felt the same thing, but because it organized action, wealth, fear, and memory around a shared public form. This is where Amenhotep II's terror becomes most durable. A purely military threat fades when the army leaves. A sacred threat can remain in the landscape. The image of the pharaoh smiting enemies is not a report from one battle. It is a repeated statement about reality. It says that the king always defeats chaos, that foreign rebellion is always doomed, that the gods always stand behind the raised arm. Even if the specific enemy changes, the scene remains the same. This repetition turns history into pattern. Amenhotep II's actual campaigns belong to time, but his royal violence belongs to eternity. The danger of such a system is that it leaves little room for the enemy's humanity. If the opponent is chaos, then mercy becomes less necessary. If rebellion is cosmic disorder, punishment can be celebrated as cleansing. If the king's strength is divine, suffering caused by that strength can be absorbed into sacred victory. This does not mean Egyptians were incapable of practical diplomacy or human complexity. Their empire depended on both: treaties, marriages, tribute relationships. Local rulers and negotiation all existed in the broader Late Bronze Age world, but the monumental language prefers a harder clarity. It does not show the compromises as vividly as the crushing. It does not linger over the bargaining when it can carve the blow. Amenhotep II's legitimacy therefore rests on a powerful fusion. He is legitimate because he is born into the royal line, because he succeeds Thutmose III, because he commands armies, because he gives to temples, because Amun favours him, because he performs superhuman strength, and because his enemies fall in the story Egypt tells about the world. Each element supports the others. Military success enriches the temples. Temple blessing sanctifies military success. Athletic display proves divine favour. Divine favour justifies political domination. Punishment creates fear. Fear protects empire. Empire produces wealth. Wealth feeds the gods. The circle closes, and within that circle the king appears inevitable. But inevitability is always a crafted effect. Behind it are scribes choosing words, artists repeating poses, priests performing rituals, officials managing goods, soldiers enforcing borders, and communities absorbing the consequences. What survives in the record suggests that Amenhotep II's reign understood the sacred usefulness of fear with unusual intensity. His violence was not merely remembered as violence, it was translated into order, into worship, into proof. The terror behind the Nile's darkest royal image did not stand outside the temple. It entered with offerings, with incense, with painted reliefs, with the falcon above the king's name. And there, beneath the gaze of Amun, fear could be made to look eternal. The story of Amenhotep II eventually leaves the open glare of battlefields, temple courts, and frontier roads, and turns into the dark, west of Thebes, beyond the river and beyond the cultivated land. The Valley of the Kings cuts into the limestone like a hidden archive of royal fear and hope. It is a place made for disappearance. The cliffs are dry, pale, and severe. The entrances to tombs are meant to be concealed. The corridors meant to carry the dead king away from the world of ordinary sight. The painted chambers meant to surround him with spells, gods, stars, serpents, gates, and the dangerous geography of the afterlife. Here, the pharaoh who once made enemies visible as warnings is himself hidden from view. The king who turned bodies into messages becomes a body protected by secrecy. Amenhotep II's tomb, known today as KV35, is one of the great royal tombs of the 18th dynasty, and it changes the modern understanding of Egypt's royal dead in a way few monuments have. Discovered in the late 19th century, it was not simply the resting place of one king. It became a chamber of layered histories, because later priests and officials used it as a cache for royal mummies moved there for protection. The tomb of Amenhotep II, created for one ruler's eternity, became a refuge for others. Kings who had once filled Egypt with names, monuments, victories, and divine claims were gathered into a single hidden place, not as conquerors in procession, but as vulnerable remains needing rescue from tomb robbery and political disorder. That later reuse gives KV35 an atmosphere unlike almost any other royal tomb. It is not merely a burial, it is a gathering of broken eternities. The original intention was clear enough. Amenhotep II would pass into the afterlife surrounded by the necessary architecture of royal transformation. His burial chamber, with its decorated walls and protective imagery, would guide the dead king through the underworld and bind him to cosmic renewal. But history rarely respects original intentions. Tombs are entered, objects vanish. Priests return centuries later. Bodies are moved, rewrapped, labelled, rearranged, hidden again. The pharaoh's afterlife, imagined as eternal and controlled, becomes subject to later human crisis. What survives in the record suggests not a smooth passage into timeless peace, but a long struggle to preserve royal bodies after the world around them had changed. Amenhotep II's own mummy was found in a striking position of continued royal identity, still associated with his sarcophagus rather than completely displaced into anonymity. This matters because many royal mummies were separated from their original tomb contexts in antiquity. The dead king's physical survival is never just a biological fact, it is an archaeological accident shaped by robbery, restoration, priestly intervention, and modern discovery. A body can survive while its grave goods disappear. A name can survive while a face becomes difficult to interpret. A tomb can preserve magnificent religious texts while losing much of the wealth that once made burial glitter. The evidence remains incomplete, and every royal mummy is both an intimate presence and a damaged historical document. The mummy of Amenhotep II also forces a quiet reversal in how the king is encountered. In life, his inscriptions expand him into superhuman scale. He is the archer, the rower, the horseman, the punisher, the ruler whose force is compared to powerful animals and divine rage. In death, he becomes silent, rapt, measured, studied, and fragile. Modern examination can estimate age, health, physical features, and embalming practice, but it cannot recover the certainty of personality. The body does not tell us whether the violent image was a true reflection of temperament, a deliberate political mask, or some combination of both. It can show a man who lived and died, not the thunder of a monument. In that contrast, the pharaoh becomes strangely human again. The objects connected with KV-35 deepen this sense of a royal world both luxurious and wounded. Fragments of glass vessels attributed to the tomb, studied for their composition and colour, reveal the sophistication of New Kingdom courtly material culture. Glass in this period is not ordinary domestic material. It is elite, technically demanding, visually intense, and tied to networks of production, exchange, and prestige. Blue, yellow, white, and multicoloured glass could imitate precious stones, catch light in a way that felt almost magical, and signal access to specialised craftsmanship. Such fragments may seem small beside the drama of war inscriptions, but they speak in another language of power. Amenhotep II's court was not only a court of bows and bodies, it was a world of colour, chemistry, imported knowledge, skilled hands, and luxury made durable enough to reach the tomb in broken pieces. The Shabti connected with Amenhotep II belongs to the same afterlife imagination. A Shabti is not a mere figurine in the modern decorative sense. It is a servant for eternity, a magical worker meant to answer on behalf of the deceased when labour is required in the next world. Royal Shabtis carry a special weight because they compress kingship into miniature form. Amenhotep II can be shown in mummiform shape, wearing royal symbols, holding signs of life, transformed from active warrior into protected eternal being. The king who commanded workers in life is accompanied by workers in death, but now the work belongs to the afterlife's sacred economy. Even eternity, for the Egyptians, has labour inside it. The tomb also reveals a subtler irony. Amenhotep II's royal ideology insists on control of enemies, animals, frontiers, temples, the body, the bow, the chariot, and the story told about his reign. But KV-35 shows how limited control becomes after death. The tomb builders can cut corridors, priests can paint spells, embalmers can preserve the body, objects can be placed with care, yet future centuries bring dangers no king can shoot down. Robbers enter royal tombs. Political centers shift. Religious priorities change. Later officials decide that the safest place for one king may be inside the tomb of another. A burial designed as a private eternal machine becomes part of a collective emergency solution. The royal cache inside KV-35 is therefore more than a discovery story. It is a confession written by history itself. Even the greatest kings could not secure their eternity exactly as planned. They could command armies, build temples, receive tribute, terrify rebels, and carve their victories into stone, but they could not prevent later generations from moving them in the night. There is something almost humbling in that. The pharaohs who claimed cosmic permanence survived because unnamed priests, restorers, and officials intervened when royal tombs became unsafe. Their afterlife depended not only on spells and gods, but on practical human decisions made long after their reigns had ended. In the darkness of KV-35, Amenhotep II's image changes again. He is no longer only the feared ruler of the inscriptions or the pious figure before Amun. He becomes a dead king among other dead kings, a host to later royal bodies, a monument turned shelter, a name attached to both power and vulnerability. The tomb gathers everything the reign has been building towards sacred kingship, wealth, violence, craftsmanship, bureaucracy, and the fragile hope that memory can be protected from time. Yet the tomb also breaks the illusion of total mastery. It reminds us that every empire eventually becomes archaeology. Every royal threat becomes text. Every body once surrounded by ceremony becomes evidence. And the king who wanted fear to travel beyond his lifetime is now known partly because his hidden chamber failed to remain entirely hidden. By the time Amenhotep II emerges from the darkness of KV-35 wrapped in the strange humility of death, the title that clings to him begins to look both powerful and unstable. Egypt's bloodiest pharaoh sounds decisive, almost like a verdict carved by history itself. But history rarely gives verdicts that clean. The phrase captures something real about the violence of his surviving image. Yet it also risks making a complex ancient ruler into a simple monster. Amenhotep II was not ruling outside the norms of imperial kingship. He was ruling inside a world that already praised conquest, displayed bound captives, and treated foreign resistance as disorder. What makes him stand out is not that he alone brought violence into Egyptian monarchy. Violence was there long before him. What makes him stand out is the intensity with which his reign seems to stage violence as proof of royal identity. The question, then, is not whether Amenhotep II was violent. The surviving record makes that clear enough in the language it chooses to preserve. The harder question is what kind of evidence that record gives us. Royal inscriptions are not private confessions. They are not battlefield diaries written with modern concern for balance. They are public instruments shaped by scribes, officials, religious expectations, and the political needs of the court. They magnify the king, compress the enemy, and arrange events so that everything points toward the same conclusion: Pharaoh is strong. Pharaoh is chosen. Pharaoh defeats chaos. When these inscriptions speak of terror, executions, captives, and displayed bodies, they may preserve real actions, but they also turn those actions into royal theatre. The evidence remains incomplete, and the theatrical form of the evidence must be taken seriously. This does not mean the violence was invented out of nothing. Ancient rulers often exaggerated, but exaggeration usually works best when attached to recognizable power. If Amenhotep II's court boasted of ferocity, it did so because ferocity had political value, and because audiences could understand the boast as plausible within the world they knew. The campaign accounts, the athletic claims, the image of the king as an unstoppable archer, the harsh punishment of rebel leaders, and the use of bodies as messages all fit together too coherently to dismiss as empty formula. They reveal a reign that wanted to be remembered through strength sharpened into fear, but they do not allow a modern reader to count the dead across all pharaohs and crown him, with certainty, the most murderous ruler in Egyptian history. The title Bloodiest also becomes difficult because ancient evidence is uneven. Some reigns are richly documented, others are damaged, poorly preserved, or known through later memory. A king who leaves many violent inscriptions may look bloodier than a king whose records are lost, muted, or framed differently. A ruler who boasts of punishment may seem more brutal than one who kills quietly, or whose scribes prefer a more restrained style. Archaeology can reveal destruction layers, human remains, fortifications, settlement disruption, and material traces of violence, but it rarely lines them up neatly with one royal personality. No single explanation fully accounts for how violence should be measured in an ancient empire. Is it the number killed? The cruelty of punishment, the scale of conquest, the terror projected through inscription, the long-term pressure of domination? Each measure would produce a different kind of answer. For Amenhotep II, the strongest case is not numerical, it is ideological. He appears as a pharaoh who turns the violent body of the king into a central argument of rule. He does not simply inherit Thutmose III's empire and manage it quietly. He dramatizes his own strength as the answer to imperial uncertainty. His athletic feats, whether literal, exaggerated, or both, belong to this argument. His military inscriptions belong to it. The punishment of captured leaders belongs to it. Even the contrast between the kneeling worshipper before Amun and the terrifying warrior before foreign lands belongs to it, because the two images together show how violence and piety could support one another. He is bloodiest not as a statistical fact, but as a dark symbolic impression left by a reign that made fear unusually visible. It is also necessary to place him among other pharaohs. Egyptian kingship had long used the image of smiting enemies. Nama, at the very beginning of dynastic iconography, already appears in the classic pose of the ruler raising his weapon over a defeated foe. Middle Kingdom kings spoke of crushing enemies and securing borders. New Kingdom rulers before and after Amenhotep II celebrated campaigns, captives, and imperial dominance. Rameses II would later cover Egypt and Nubia with battle imagery, especially connected to Kadesh, turning a difficult military encounter into a monumental triumph. Merneptah would boast of victories and devastation in language that still echoes through debates today. Amenhotep II stands in this long tradition. He did not invent the grammar of royal violence. He used it with a particular cold brilliance. That coldness may come from his historical position. He follows the greatest military expansion of Thutmose III and must maintain a system that is already stretched. A conqueror who wins new lands can be remembered for expansion. A successor who holds them must often be remembered for discipline. Amenhotep II's brutality may reflect the needs of maintenance after conquest. The empire has been built, and now it must be reminded that it remains conquered. In that situation, terror can become a substitute for constant campaigning. A few spectacular punishments, presented with enough force, can speak across many provinces. This does not excuse the terror. It explains why the royal state might have chosen to advertise it. The archaeological record offers a quieter counterweight to the inscriptions. Tomb objects, temple remains, statues, glass fragments, faunal remains from temple annexes, and administrative traces do not deny the violent image, but they prevent it from becoming the whole man or the whole reign. Amenhotep II's Egypt is not only a landscape of punishment, it is a world of craftsmen, priests, cooks, grooms, scribes, quarry workers, embalmers, and officials. It is a world of luxury glass, painted limestone, kneeling statues, falcon symbolism, mortuary offerings, and the daily routines that kept royal ideology alive. The same reign that speaks of terror also leaves behind evidence of food preparation, sacred service, and material refinement. This is not a contradiction to be solved. It is the nature of imperial civilization. Elegance and coercion can grow from the same root. The man himself remains partly unreachable. Was Amenhotep II personally cruel by the standards of his own time? Was he unusually invested in bodily strength because he needed to outshine his father's shadow? Did his court exaggerate his ferocity to stabilize a transition? Did the empire's outer provinces actually experience his reign as uniquely terrifying? Or does the surviving Egyptian record make it look that way because the texts are so vivid? Scholars still debate these questions, and the evidence does not allow a final psychological portrait. Ancient kings rarely give us access to their inner selves. They give us masks, and sometimes the mask is the most important thing because it is what the state used to rule. So Amenhotep II should be approached as both ruler and construction. There was a living man trained, crowned, aging, dying, embalmed. There was also the royal image, the superhuman archer, the divine warrior, the punisher of rebels, the beloved of Amun, the falcon king. Between the two lies the space where history must work carefully. To call him simply bloodthirsty is too flat. To soften the violence into mere formula is too safe. The truth lies in the harsher middle. Amenhotep II's reign shows how an ancient empire could use real violence, exaggerated violence, sacred language, and public memory together, until terror itself became part of the architecture of rule. In that sense, the royal mask may be more frightening than the man. A cruel man dies. A political image can continue working for centuries. Amenhotep II's body was hidden in the Valley of the Kings, vulnerable like every other body, but the image he helped create remained harder to bury. It survives in inscriptions that still make modern readers pause, in the unsettling pride with which punishment is remembered, in the way beauty and brutality sit side by side without apology. Whether or not he was truly Egypt's bloodiest pharaoh, Amenhotep II left one of its most chilling lessons in kingship. An empire does not need to hide fear when it has learned how to call fear order. Amenhotep II's reign does not end with a sudden collapse, and that may be one of the most revealing things about it. The terror in his inscriptions can make his rule feel like a dark flare, violent and singular, but historically he belongs to a wider continuity. Egypt remains powerful after him. The empire does not fall apart at his death. Nubian gold continues to move north. Temples continue to receive offerings. Royal names continue to be carved, praised, buried, restored, and reinterpreted. Thutmose IV succeeds him and preserves the line. Then comes Amenhotep III, whose reign will glow with extraordinary wealth, diplomacy, monumental ambition, and divine kingship on a scale so lavish that the hard military tone of Amenhotep II can seem, at first, like something from a different Egypt. But the two worlds are connected. The golden calm of later 18th dynasty power rests partly on the empire that earlier kings built, frightened, organized, and maintained. Amenhotep II's legacy is therefore not only the memory of brutality, it is the preservation of an imperial system at a dangerous moment. He follows Thutmose III, whose conquests create enormous expectations, and he manages to carry that inheritance forward without visible disintegration. That fact matters. A weak successor after a great conqueror can undo a generation of expansion. Distant rulers may rebel, allies may drift, temple elites may question royal favour, and internal factions may begin to test the centre. Amenhotep II's official image answers all of those dangers with force. He makes himself appear physically impossible, militarily immediate, divinely authorized, and emotionally unsafe to provoke. Whether every claim is literal or theatrical, the political message is clear: Egypt has not softened. The empire still has teeth. Yet the very intensity of that message points forward to later tensions. Amenhotep II belongs to a dynasty increasingly skilled at turning kingship into spectacle. Under him, this spectacle is the warrior body, the bow, drawn beyond ordinary strength, the chariot racing through imagined dust, the defeated enemy displayed as a warning, the king kneeling before Amun after making foreign lands submit. Under Amenhotep III, royal spectacle will become more heavily weighted toward luxury. Divine radiance, colossal statues, festival culture, diplomatic marriage, and the dazzling abundance of a court that can make power look almost effortless. Under Akhenaten, spectacle will become stranger still, centered on a radical religious vision that shifts attention toward the Aten and reshapes royal art, ritual, and language. The forms change, but the underlying question remains: how does a pharaoh make power visible enough to feel inevitable? Amenhotep II's answer is fear disciplined by theology. Later kings will not always use the same tone, but they inherit the system in which royal image can reorganize reality. The pharaoh is not merely a ruler, he is a performance repeated through stone, ritual, body, name, and myth. That performance can emphasize conquest, beauty, divine birth, solar light, family intimacy, athletic strength, or cosmic uniqueness. It can change dramatically while still drawing from the same deep reservoir of Egyptian kingship. Amenhotep II shows one extreme of that reservoir, the king as weapon. Akhenaten will show another, the king as exclusive mediator of a transformed divine order. No single explanation fully accounts for the path from one to the other, but both reveal how powerful and unstable royal ideology could become when pushed hard. The relationship with Amun also casts a long shadow. Amenhotep II's reign depends heavily on the traditional sacred world in which Amun grants legitimacy, receives offerings, and stands behind the king's victories. The temples of Amun are enriched by empire and bound to the monarchy through ritual exchange. This relationship helps stabilize Amenhotep II's rule, but it also strengthens religious institutions that later pharaohs must continue to manage. By the time of Amenhotep III and Akhenaten, questions of royal divinity, temple wealth, solar theology, and the balance between crown and priesthood will become increasingly charged. It would be too simple to say Amenhotep II causes the Amarna age. He does not, but his reign belongs to the same dynastic arc, where imperial wealth, sacred kingship, and the visibility of divine power grow ever more elaborate and difficult to contain. His military legacy also changes shape after him. Egypt's northern empire remains important, but later 18th dynasty power often appears less focused on repeated campaigning and more on diplomacy, prestige, marriage alliances, gift exchange, and the management of relationships among great kingdoms. This does not mean violence disappears. It never does. But the tone shifts. The world Amenhotep II helps secure becomes the stage on which later rulers can afford to look more serene. The terrifying maintenance of empire makes possible the polished diplomacy of empire. The arrow and the gold cup belong to the same long story, though one is easier to admire in a museum case. In memory, however, Amenhotep II remains difficult to soften. His reign leaves behind too much hard language, too much pride in punishment, too much insistence that the king's body itself is a force of domination. He is not remembered today as a gentle administrator, even though administration sustained everything he did. He is not remembered mainly as a builder, even though monuments and sacred spaces mattered deeply to his kingship. He is remembered through the dark magnetism of a ruler who made fear part of his royal surface. What survives in the record suggests a king who understood that violence could become more powerful when shaped into image, ritual, and story. And this is perhaps his most enduring echo. Amenhotep II shows how an ancient empire can make brutality beautiful without making it harmless. His world gives us painted stelae, kneeling statues, falcon symbols, luxury glass, tomb chambers, temple kitchens, and sacred offerings. It also gives us punitive spectacle, imperial silence, bodies turned into warnings, and foreign peoples reduced to signs beneath the king's feet. The same civilization produces both. That is why his reign feels so unsettling. It refuses the easy separation between refinement and cruelty. The Nile can carry incense and fear in the same current. By the time later Egypt moves toward the splendor of Amenhotep III and the rupture of Akhenaten, Amenhotep II has already become part of the buried foundation beneath them. His reign keeps the empire intact, strengthens the language of the royal exception, and demonstrates how intensely a pharaoh can fuse physical power with divine legitimacy. He does not stand at the end of Egypt's greatness, but near the middle of a dangerous height. Behind him lies the age of conquest. Ahead lies the age of dazzling wealth and religious transformation. Around him is the shadowed truth of empire power survives not only by winning battles, but by deciding how those battles will be remembered. Amenhotep II's legacy is not that he was certainly Egypt's bloodiest king in any measurable sense. It is that he made the image of blood serve the throne so effectively that, more than 3,000 years later, the darkness still clings to his name. The Nile keeps moving after Amenhotep II. It moves past ruined temples, past buried courts, past broken statues and fields that return each year to green. It moves past names that once shook provinces and now require careful reading beneath museum light. The king who wanted to appear impossible becomes, in the end, part of the same slow erosion as every ruler before and after him. His arrows are gone, his horses are gone, the voices that praised him are gone. Even the fear he sent along roads and rivers has faded into fragments of text, translated, debated, handled with gloves, and placed inside the quiet rooms of scholarship. Yet something remains, not the man entire, because no ancient life survives entire, not the empire as it wished to be seen, because every empire hides too much of itself. What remains is a pattern, sharp enough to recognize across time the way power dresses itself in sacred language, the way violence becomes ceremony, the way beauty can stand beside terror without apology. Amenhotep II's Egypt is distant, but not empty. It still asks how memory is made, who is allowed to speak, who is turned into a symbol, and how easily fear can be called order when the voice of the ruler is the loudest voice left. In the darkness of KV-35, the pharaoh's body rested among other kings, no longer swift, no longer armed, no longer able to command the living world. Around him, later hands tried to preserve what time and robbery threatened to take. That hidden chamber may be the truest final image of his reign, not the warrior in the chariot, not the archer piercing the impossible target, not the conqueror whose enemies tremble, but a human body wrapped against oblivion, dependent at last on the care of others. The cliffs above the Valley of the Kings are quiet now. The desert does not repeat royal boasts. The stars do not explain the motives of dead kings. The river flows on, carrying silt, reflection, and silence. Somewhere between the broken inscription and the sleeping tomb, Amenhotep II remains what history often leaves behind, a shadow with a name, a warning with a face, and a reminder that even the loudest power eventually becomes a question whispered in the dust.